Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum students, and a very good day to all of you. I welcome you in the 11th lecture of report writing skills. Hopefully you're getting more and more clear with the passage of time the way we are moving ahead. We started, of course, from an overview of report, its structure, types, then making it more general and trying to understand the basic concept of technical communication, technical writing, then its objectives. Once these became more and more clear, and when the time was here to take a start of our own writing, then we considered it more important to take you in the actual writing process, the way you begin your writing. It seems like as though all the professionals, they have a draft and they have such expertise that they can just begin and start writing everything which comes in mind. But to give you a real picture, how to reach to this level of writing everything at the spot and on immediate basis, it requires an exercise. And due to the same purpose, we are looking into the actual writing process, how it begins, how the writing takes a start, and then what are the basic points to consider to make it a perfect draft which you can simply share with your audience. So talking about some of the important points which we have covered in the previous lecture with respect to the writing process, we started with the very first stage, and which is your pre-writing techniques. And these were discussed in detail by starting, of course, from defining what pre-writing means, its significance, and then we started to look into each and every form and each and every technique. You have talked about the free writing, then brainstorming, then of course looping and mind mapping, journalistic questions, and so on and so forth. There are different forms of pre-writing techniques that we have talked about based on their objectives, and you can even combine them together to get a perfect picture within your mind. How are you going to write and which points to cover? You have assembled all the ideas, and now it's time to take a start. So now we can move ahead with the actual writing process. Stage 2, in which you have to come up with your writing. Giving you an overview, so you can clearly see over here that the writing process itself is recursive. Now what do we mean by this word recursive? Recursive basically refers to the process of recurrence, repetition, a cyclical process which is happening again and again. We talk about the writing itself, of course, the process which won't happen just for once in your life. There will be different forms in which you have to write. There will be different scenarios in which it will be expected from you to come up with a draft for communication, for the transfer of information. So of course, this writing process becomes recursive. One way of looking at this word. Another way is that when the writing process begins, there are different occasions in which you have to revert back. On one hand, you have to revert back towards stage 1, and even once again the pre-writing is complete, you will start writing again. You will move towards the next step, which we are going to discuss once this stage 2 is complete, and from that stage, once again, for that single draft for which you are going through these stages, you have to revert back again. It depends on the needs, the objectives. Once these are achieved, you can move ahead. If the objectives are not achieved, then this process will become cyclical, and you'll have to do it to make it a perfect draft. That's why we call it as a recursive process. If you look at the diagram as well, which we have provided you at the bottom, you can see there is a connection of this writing with rewriting as well as rewriting. So it basically means that from this writing, you have to move towards rewriting, and there are occasions in which you feel like that the information itself is incomplete, it requires improvement, you revert back to writing again, and even from this writing you can move towards pre-writing as well. Pre-writing means again going through those techniques of getting and extracting ideas, assembling them together to come up with your writing. The 3 steps as written over here are dynamic and overlapping. Again, this is the basic point to understand over here. Overlapping has already been explained by this nature of being cyclical, and dynamic means that you have to do it as an active process. On one hand, you have something which is static. Once you do it, the story is over. But once we say that it's dynamic, it means that it's an active process which would simply make you do it again and again. That's why we are calling it as being overlapping on one hand and being dynamic as well. Now, third bullet simply gives you the advantage that you get out of it, that it improves the correspondence and enhances your professionalism. So this is what you get out of it, the advantage of this writing process if you do it in its real sense, as you're going to see it in the upcoming slides as well. So now our focus would be towards this writing. So far we have covered our planning stage. We are clear. We can suppose that we are done with this brainstorming. We have done some free writing as well. We have collected all the ideas. We have done some listing as well for the organization of ideas. So it's time to move from this stage to this one, and that is our writing. So going into its details, we can say about this writing that these are the basic things which you are supposed to do when we talk about the second stage of writing. The first point, as you can see over here, is that it basically deals with drafting. And drafting refers to composing or preparing a draft. Now, what's basically a draft, if I ask you? You would have seen, you would have heard the term as well within your surroundings, even if you have done some part-time job. So this term draft is commonly used in the environment. And it basically refers to the preliminary form of writing. Preliminary means again something which is tentative, something which is subject to improvement, and something which is going to lead you towards the actual content which is supposed to be provided to our audience and our readers. So it's basically the preliminary form of writing that you are supposed to do within this stage. This is your basic objective if we talk about the second stage. Then, of course, once this drafting is complete, the next thing to focus and concentrate on within this second stage is to organize your ideas and to order your ideas. So you have to sequence them. You have to sequence all the ideas that you have extracted from that first stage of writing, stage 1. It's time to organize them and to come up with a draft. So you basically prepare a draft by presenting and sequencing and ordering your ideas. So it is basically done through this ordering of ideas. And how do you order these ideas? So this is basically by the organization of information in the form of paragraphs. These are stepwise process to finally achieve this preliminary form of writing that you call as the draft. Now, talking about some other points, 3 important things to consider while you are organizing your content, sequencing it into priority-wise ideas, and then finally getting the draft. So basically, these are the things that you have to keep in mind, which is basically part of your content as well when you are preparing a draft. First thing is unity. You can take it as the three unity faith discipline that we have been studying as well. So in a similar way as we have this significance of unity among ourselves to be as a nation, in a similar way you can exemplify that situation within your writing as well. So if the content is united, every information is directly linked with the central theme, then it means that you have a draft and you are successfully able to organize ideas into an organized form. This is the basic thing which we say as unity. Everything is referring back to the main point. You will see this main point becomes your topic. This main point or your topic is explained at the very beginning in the form of a thesis statement that we are going to see as well. But this main point will stay at the center and you will talk about things around it. And that is how you will get the basic text which you are developing based on this central point. This is basically unity. Then comes your support, that you have to support your content that you have provided with some examples. If you talk about our own lectures, and if I have to explain something, so I try my level best to give you some examples so that you can basically understand the concept. If there is a difference between different types of report, so if you have seen that I tried to give you some examples as well. If there is a difference between different strategies or forms of writing, or even talk about the pre-writing techniques, so we do something in the form of an example, just to give you an idea. And then you develop an idea, you try to understand it in a better way. So it's all happening because of these examples. So this is something which you have to remember when it comes to your own writing as well, that in addition to all the points referring back to the main point, which is your theme, thesis, you have to provide some examples as well, which would become one way or another as the supporting details. Once this support is complete, then comes your coherence. Sometimes even I myself used to get confused as well. Don't you think unity or coherence are one and the same? They are used often together, but there is a difference, because unity basically refers to that all the information which is coming one after the other is basically referring back to the main point, trying to support the basic thing that you are talking about. Whereas if we talk about this coherence, this is basically the logical connection which is developing between sentences, forming a whole. That's why I have written over here that everything is connected to form a whole. So you can say that it's basically a single form which is forming a draft directly linked together. Giving you an example of our own body. So things are directly connected, and that is how we call ourselves as a living organism or a human body, because although we are performing different things, but we are connected through our nervous system. So in a similar way, that this text has to be connected, interlinked. Every point has to support the other point as well, developing the connection so that your reader may not get distracted that where did this information come from? Does it have to do anything with the information which has been provided previously? So one information should lead to the other. It would become the coherence. Whereas if all these points are referring back to the main point, which is your thesis, would mean that it's all united as well. So that's how you get unity, you get supporting details, evidences, examples, and finally you'll get the coherence as well. So that is how you talk about this second stage of writing, in which you basically get a draft. Now the next stage is basically that you have to organize your information according to a logical sequence which your readers can follow. and the example basically becomes the focus. There is a manner in which you are supposed to write the information, and there are different modes of writing, as you're going to see as well, and they're going to have some differences. We're going to discuss them gradually in the form of some example as well, so that you may have an idea that writing is not just a random process, but it's once again an organized form of writing, as you will see over here, and you have to structure it based on the objectives and the examples for which that writing has to be done. Looking at this chronological form of writing, so it's basically good for the instructions. We have this spatial form of writing, which is good for technical descriptions. Then we have this writing for importance. You have to highlight something, so it's basically used for reports and memos. As we have studied as well, we have a subject matter and then we have to highlight its importance. So that is why this form of writing is used in reports and memos. We have a problem solution form of writing, which is good for basically proposal, as you want to propose something, coming up with some idea and you want it to be approved, so you provide a solution. For comparison and contrast, this is the form of writing that you have to do, and basically good for showing some alternatives. So you have one thing, and in comparison to this thing you want to suggest another one. So for this you have to come up with this comparison and contrast form of writing for providing an alternative. Now looking into the details of these forms of writing, starting of course from the chronological form of writing. So basically this chronology means that you move in this temporal sequence, just the way we have this time to simply order our own life. We have this concept of time, so that we may know that when are we going to have this morning, then noon, then afternoon, then evening, then night. So this time basically organizes this duration of the day for us. So basically it is for organizing things. So this writing, if you do it in the same way, it's called as the chronological form of writing. Writing which is based on these things, you present them the manner in which they occurred in time. So method of organizing, to present events and actions as they occurred in time. And basically when you are narrating something in the form of a story, so of course you prefer to use this narrative form or this chronological form of writing within the narrative essays. For example, this is a text written, and you can get a good idea that you have this temporal sequence within this form of writing. Waking up at 8 a.m. and then getting ready to reach office at 9:30 a.m. Then collecting all the points to be discussed at the meeting to be held at 10 a.m. and then meeting went on. You finally have a break at 1, then you take your lunch. So things moving in a very temporal sequence, the way the sun comes up and you know it's the morning time, then you have to get ready. So this clock basically which is there in front of us, so you have to use the time sequence to order your own writing. So this is basically the chronological form of writing. You move ahead and we get the spatial form of writing. Now spatial basically refers to method of writing in which items are basically described and explained according to their physical position and their relationship to the other things. So you look at them, spatial is basically from space. The other one is basically from time, which we have just discussed. So this one is basically referring to looking at the things as they are and defining them from their physical appearance. And this is basically the form of writing as referred to earlier, used for providing some technical description. For example, I have seen some advertisement as well, I have seen some websites as well. So this was like a good example talking about this Grande, the new edition of Toyota Corolla, and the manner in which you can look at the descriptions of the other automobiles as well, but this is just for an example. So this is the manner in which they describe the interior. 3D floating interior with soft touch padding creates this luxuriously spacious, ergonomic and prestigious environment. Talking about the interior and then all the words which have been used, but the purpose is that you are trying to define this space, the interior space, physical appearance, the way it is. You're trying to describe it and coming up with some examples as well. So this is basically like a simple example of technical spatial writing, and you are providing the technical descriptions as well, the way things appear. You talk about writing for importance. You have to highlight the significance of your subject matter, and for this purpose just have a look at this example. CIIT pioneered hybrid learning is gaining momentum across Pakistan, offering education at par with international standards, which you are experiencing as well. So you can have a good idea if you have to talk about it. It can be and has become the important hashtag, being the topic of discussion. So based on this importance, if you have to talk about it or if you have to read its description, your mode of writing would be this, writing for importance, and that is how you're going to structure your information. Just one example to give you an idea. Writing for problem and solution. There is a problem which you're going to define, and then based on this problem you are going to talk about a solution. So this is the mode of writing that you will be using. Talking about this example, once again, in eco-idle system, this is eco is from environment. So the new system which is basically introduced in the new automobiles, because of which the average itself has increased, and secondly less carbon emissions. So this is the text is telling you about eco-idle system has been integrated within the modern automobiles to reduce the percentage of global carbon emissions which are responsible for the greenhouse effect and consequently global warming. So we are well aware of this concept of global warming, the way it's affecting things, the way you experience. If you look at the global news, the world media is highlighting on daily basis some new hurricane is coming. Like I just remember about Irma, and then nowadays the discussion is there of a new hurricane, new storm which is Maria. So these are the certain storms which are becoming more and more stronger, creating havoc for the people living at coastal areas. So all happening because of this global warming and the changes which are happening in our global temperature. So these are basically the problems, and to solve them you are coming up with some solution, and this is one solution which has been integrated within the modern cars, the automobiles. This is the manner in which you're going to structure your writing. One example of problem solution writing. Then if you have to compare and contrast something, and in comparison to something you have to provide an alternative, this is basically the form of writing which is basically used. And for this comparative analysis, a good example is the car booking apps which have become quite common and now being used across Pakistan as well. So first came the Careem and then Uber, and now these have become quite common. So just for a comparative analysis, most of you who are and have experienced, the rest can just look into the internet for the statistics as well. But based on that analysis, Uber is comparatively cheaper as compared to Careem, and all kinds of automobiles are easily accessible. This is not the case with Careem, as it prefers a Japanese automobile compared to the other common banks in Pakistan. So comparatively cheaper and compared to is a way of doing this comparative analysis form of writing in which you are coming up with this comparison and contrast. So one example of this comparison and contrast form of writing. So the purpose here is once again just to give you an idea that writing is not just a random process that you just start writing based on the ideas which you have collected based on the pre-writing techniques. But once again, you just have to focus on that what you really have to do and what you really have to prepare. And based on the objectives, then you have to pick one mode of writing as discussed in the previous slides based on these examples, that which one of these would be the ideal choice for coming up with your draft. Writing for clarity. This is also important, and most of you would have developed a clear idea what this clarity means and how it is developed. So even if I ask you to tell me how can you develop clarity within your writing, you'd be easily able to tell me how you can make your content clear. So if you just revert back to the things, you'll remember that we talked about the white spaces, the manner in which we have to place them. Then I remember we talked about the changes in the fonts. For example, if you are using a small font, that means even if you notice billboards and the advertisements, there are things which are written in a very small font, just making you think that something which is not that important. And the most important thing is written in the biggest font, which means that this is the most important point that has to be considered, which is to be noticed by your viewers and your audience. So that's the way in which you can vary your font. Then of course you can use the bullets, then you can move towards using some headings, so you can just come up with different ways just to make your document more and more accessible. This is what we mean when we talk about writing for clarity. Hopefully we have discussed each and every one of them. I don't think we have missed any of these. While just talking about these, we have covered white spaces, we have talked about headings, we have talked about bullets, font changes, and of course color is also very much important. You vary color based on their significance as well. For example, within this presentation as well, you have noticed that if I have to highlight something, general text is written in black, whereas if there is some important point to be noted, then I use this red color so that it may be remembered. The larger wavelength, I try to use it so that it's a color which catches the attention, and that's why I'm using it for you as well, so that you may remember the point as well. One point I guess I missed while I was just verbally discussing or reverting back to this accessible document design which we have discussed, and clarity. So the point is graphics. So within your writing, where it's feasible, where it can be used, you have to use graphics as well. And graphic basically refers to pie charts, histograms, graphs, tables, charts, and many more things which you can just simply integrate within your writing. But the purpose remains the same. You have to make your content clear as well when it comes to your writing. You should be clear yourself and try to make your content clear as well for preparing this draft. Now, writing this draft, the time is here when you have to start writing the draft. Draft is basically, as we have discussed, piece of writing which will be changing. That's why I call it as preliminary form of writing. So don't consider it as your final copy, because it's not going to be. Despite all the additions of the different things to make it more clear, there is still a space and need of doing some more work over the content and over the draft. And that's the only way you'll get the final version, which would be perfect to be shared with your readers. So don't consider it as the final copy. Why? Again, it's a preliminary piece of writing. And once you start working on it, there is a tip for you, and that is try to go and move towards writing more than one draft. Don't consider that you have just written one draft and the story is over. Based on this draft and the mistakes highlighted, now you can move and proceed towards writing your content after editing, of course, which would be considered final. There is always a space of an improvement, and try to use that space for yourself to make your writing more perfect. If you are writing more than one draft, it will help you to identify even more errors which were not in the notice of your reviewers, your peers who were reading your draft. Even you, if you are writing that draft for the first time, you may not notice because you are the one writing and you would consider it to be perfect because I have written it. But after a while, if that topic has become cold, after a while you have taken some rest, and then if you objectively read that content, you realize there were things which you didn't notice, but those were the errors which could have created trouble for you, confusing your readers. And that is the time when you have to change, edit, remove those errors and mistakes, prepare a second draft to making it more perfect. So that's why you have to write more than one draft. That will make your writing more better. This is also another point to remember, that of course you have to generate ideas throughout the process. First of all, within pre-writing, it's more or less related to extracting ideas to write about. You need some points on which you can talk, some basic arguments or supporting examples that you can simply mention. With respect to a topic, you try to collect some points which become the ideas that you organize, and then you come up with a draft. But this exercise of generating ideas is not just restricted to extracting points to write, but these ideas are versatile, and these ideas could also be related to how to write this content in such a way that it would be more comprehensible, more legible, and easy to read by your audience. So that's why this idea generation process would continue throughout your writing. Even if you notice and if you look into, if you analyze this writing process, we have been doing this, although not based on rote learning or cramming, but if you do this writing based on the creativity coming out of you, so you realize you are thinking throughout. Sometimes this thinking may confuse you as well, which is why it's recommended to jot down all the ideas at the very first place, pre-writing. You can do this pre-writing at the end of the page as well, so that once you have started writing the actual draft, you can just revert back, come to the last page and see what were the points. Because during this writing, ideas are just coming in such a haphazard way that they can confuse you as well. But if you already have an organized form of all the points in front of you, you will know how to order them. So that's why there is a manner of generating your own ideas as well. These are some of the questions which you can ask yourself during this actual writing process, or you can call it as drafting. How can I group my ideas in paragraphs? What is the focus and purpose of each paragraph? And in what order should I present my ideas? So, as I mentioned within my discussion, that idea generation within the previous slides, pre-writing technique, was more or less related to what points to be written and what points to mention within your writing. But over here you have to think of how to simply write those ideas, how to organize them, of course, within the form of paragraphs, because each paragraph would talk about a single idea. And to talk about the single idea, you have to come up with some supporting details as well. And that is how you'll structure a paragraph. In a similar way, each idea would be represented within paragraphs, and that is how you'll develop your final writing. That's how it becomes an organized form of writing, and that's why these questions are important. How to group your ideas, how to maintain focus and purpose of your each and every paragraph, and how to order your information. Of course, that's why we talked about this writing for importance. Another way of looking at it is basically that when you are writing something to catch the attention of the reader, it is wise to mention the most important point at the very first. If you consider the next point to be a little less important compared to the first point, it will come second, and that is how you'll move from most important to less important and then least. Of course, things are all important, which you're going to mention, but you have to focus on the most important point, which is going to come first. That's why this exercise of grouping your ideas, thinking about the focus and purpose of each paragraph, and then ordering them into most important to less important. That's why you have to ask these questions. It will help you to generate some more ideas of organizing your content. Hopefully you are following me, because these are also the points to consider when we talk about this stage of drafting. This next slide is going to give you an idea of what basically we do in case of drafting, that is the free flow of ideas. And based on this free flow of ideas, then you craft a structure for your thoughts. And the manner you do it is basically that you follow a specific structure. Alternatively, you restructure your ideas to follow a certain order. Then a strong sense of organization is there that supports your main idea. And of course, this is the most important, that you are clear about the reason to choose a specific structure for your ideas. So the points that I mentioned earlier as well, once again for your explanation, these points are here for you to remember as well, that this is the part in which you have to generate ideas as well, and these ideas would be based on the purpose, the focus, the manner in which to organize ideas within your paragraph, and then how to organize those paragraphs. So this is the task to be performed when it comes to your drafting, which is why we call it as a preliminary form of writing. Now coming towards the steps to follow for this drafting, because it's not something that you just take a start for in this writing form. No, it's based on an exercise, and that is how you do it, starting from research. This is like a quick overview, then we'll go to the detail of what we basically have to do. We talk about research based on this data collection and some background reading as well. So it all begins from this step one. You are collecting the data and clearing your mind that what background has to be provided to your reading. Once this research is complete, you move towards the organization. Organization in one sense is a bit tricky, because over here you have these two forms of practicing this organization. You can either diverge, like you are basically moving in this direction from this point, or for example you have this point and from this you are trying to move over here in this form. So you are over here converging, whereas over here you are diverging from this central point. So this is basically the difference. So in case of this divergent thinking, so you are diverging, as the diagram shows, the lower one on your right. So you are trying to diverge, and from this divergence, of course, the space is increasing. And this space requires more information. Therefore, this is the strategy used for creativity. If you have to do this creative writing, this is the practice which is basically performed. We are talking about it in journal, but this is basically the strategy to be used if you have to come up with details, if you have to come up with more information. Whereas if you talk about the convergent thinking provided by Joy Paul, this strategy, so it is basically used when you have to just provide point blank to the point answers. Multiple choice is very brief, but it is also a good example as well if you talk about this convergent thinking. You have different options, you have a statement, you pick one, story's over. But if you talk about close-ended, giving some space to write, again you have to write just a simple and straightforward answer to the provided question. For that, you also go towards the convergent thinking. Based on everything, you have to provide the answer in a concise manner, so you do this convergent thinking. So that's why based on the writing you have to pick one of these two, whether to go for the divergent thinking or the convergent thinking. Once this is complete, then you come towards the next step, which is composing and drafting. And basically you do it by writing one section of a rough draft at a time and then developing connection between ideas. So that's why one section of, I would say, one rough draft, which means that you have to draft again as well to point out the errors and to rectify them. That's how you do this exercise, and that's why you have to keep in mind all these stages which we are discussing over here as well for drafting. Now, if we talk about drafting in journal, once the stages are clear, your drafting basically occurs when you put ideas into sentences, paragraphs, and the focus or the concentration is towards explaining and supporting your ideas fully. If it's the central idea, then the focus would be on that idea and its explanation and providing supporting evidence. But if these are the ideas which are coming after the thesis statement to support it, then you need to connect your ideas as well. This is the point. Then the next thing to note is that this draft tends to be writer-centered, because the reason why we call it that writer-centered is that in the initial stages, if we are writing our first draft, we know that there are going to be some mistakes as well. So we are, even I myself, get hesitant to share it with my peers, because I will simply say, oh, they're going to make fun of all the mistakes, they may not like it. But if you feel like it's a text which should be shared, of course you can share it. But in journal, it's writer-centered. You give yourself the space to correct it by identifying all the errors and then to come up with a draft which you can share with your peer. That's why we're calling it as the initial draft, of course, and in particular to be writer-centered, because you are the one telling yourself about the topic, that what do you know about it. And if it's really something which is not worth sharing, of course you'll revert back again based on this overlapping stages to pre-writing, and again after reading something, collecting some information, collecting some data, then you'll jot down some points for yourself. Again you will revert back to pre-writing, and after everything has been assembled, you will move forward to the actual writing stage to come up with the next draft. That's how you do the exercise. Point to remember is that you don't need to pay much attention to such things as spelling and the other errors as well, but more attention should be on the purpose and focus, because it's your own draft, and if it's writer-centered, then you can simply remove the errors once you have to share it with your readers. But right now, if it's related to you, focus should be on whether your ideas are clear, whether they are organized or not. Then comes the next step of its presentation. Now, looking into the details of those steps that we talked about, starting from the first step of research. So this is basically what you do within this stage: gathering information, data collection, and assembling some facts which are needed to convey and to support your message. So what you can use is that you can go for the search engines, as we have. Google is a big search engine. You can look into it. You can also go for the books, look into the details. You'll find some important points. Personal surveys and interviews are also a very good source of research which could give you very authentic and credible points to be cited and to be mentioned within your writing. Once the research data collection is complete, then comes the stage of organizing your information, and that is something which you can do based on your own comfort level. For example, you can use diagrams for connecting ideas together. You can use outlines for giving a sequence. This is also a very common exercise within the essay writing test and evaluation, that you are supposed, it is basically assigned to you as well, that you have to prepare an outline first, because it will be evaluated as well. Based on this outline, the examiner also checks as to how much you are clear about what you are supposed to write. So this outline is a very important factor as well, and you should know how to prepare a good outline as well. So this organization in the form of diagrams and outline is basically to help group similar ideas together. So this is the purpose. And while outlining, while preparing an outline, you have to keep in mind that points are to be linked with one another, which are coming one after the other. This will develop this logical links which we talked about, and that is of course coherence. Then narrow the focus of the message as well, because these ideas, once they are linked together, they'll bring you to the main point, and that point is of course the thesis. So you have to focus. Once again, based on all the information that you have collected, you have to narrow the focus of the message to the basic point. Good rule of thumb is to combine information into groups of 3 or 5, which will ultimately become the main ideas or the headings of the message. So this is the way in which you can do this exercise of organizing the ideas. A rule of thumb, you can give it a try. And if it doesn't work, of course you can look for the other tasks and exercises as well. Once this organization is complete, then comes the next step of drafting, which is composing. The final thing which will give you the actual draft to work on. So first drafts are often written quickly as you are writing them, and it is supposed to be written quickly as well, as you have to jot down things, all the things which you have assembled and collected. Just jot it down, irrespective of all the errors as discussed in the previous slide. No need to worry about the grammatical errors. Just focus on the provision of information and its organization, which will make things clear for you to write them the next time you are preparing a draft which will become your final, will be shared with your readers as well. So they are often written quickly and in no way perfect, but they serve as a way of initially laying thoughts down on paper for further refinement. So this will remain the focus in the upcoming drafts as well. This will become the building point of moving towards your next draft, which will be more perfect compared to the next one, compared to the previous one. My apologies. Now, the important points to note when you are moving from this first draft to the final stages in which things are supposed to be there. There are certain things which would become the factor to be observed by your readers, and if these are there, that draft would be accepted, will be appreciated, and now it's time to look into it. When you begin to draft your writing, you need to keep in mind 5 separate writing techniques that will help your reader understand your paper. Of course, you can apply them in the initial stages as well, but you have to keep them permanently within your final draft. These are supposed to be there. These qualities are going to make it a perfect draft, which would of course move towards the final stage, which you can simply, after this third stage is complete, can be shared with your readers as well. So the points are that when it comes to your draft, it has to provide a very clear and lucid thesis statement. Then you are supposed to provide topic sentences within your paragraphs. Then within this final draft, you need sufficient support as well to simply back every point which you have mentioned. Then of course the coherence is expected within the content. Everything has to be linked, and unity means if this is the central points and these are all the paragraphs, every point has to be linked with this central point, and that is how you're going to get your unity. So now looking into the details of all these points, you start with a thesis statement, and this is basically as written in red. This is the use of color that I talked earlier, accessible document design, that it becomes the basis of your entire paper. You have a topic, for example, related to smoking, and you're going to have this statement over here at the very beginning that you write, and it is like the basis of your entire paper, and it basically lets the reader know what your paper is going to cover. Now if you look at the example, there are 4 possible causes of smoking, yet not all smokers smoke for these reasons, and this ends. Now, this statement itself is very much clear and has set the foundation of what's coming ahead within the text. That is how you are supposed to structure your thesis statement, letting the readers know what the whole content is about. And afterwards, you're going to have paragraphs. Within these paragraphs, some other points are supposed to be there that we'll be discussing one by one. The first point is that every paragraph should have a topic sentence. Of course, if we talk about a whole draft, you give it a topic. That is the main topic. But of course, afterwards within your writing, within your first writing content, the first paragraph we call it, the first paragraph will have this thesis statement, a very clearly defined thesis statement which has simply established the foundation of the whole writing content, and once this is complete, you'll proceed towards providing some paragraphs. And in each of these paragraphs, you have to discuss a separate point which you have collected with pre-writing as well as the initial stages of writing. We have talked about how to assemble, organize and prioritize your ideas, of course starting from the most important and then coming towards the less important. So after that exercise is complete, then you have to write paragraphs. But at the very start of the paragraph, you have to provide a sentence which stands as the topic of that whole paragraph. So it will clearly define what's coming ahead within this paragraph. That's why it's known as the topic sentence, stating the main idea of that paragraph, what is coming ahead. So even if someone already knows, that's the purpose of a topic sentence, that if they know about it, they can just move to the next topic sentence or the next paragraph. So similar to a thesis statement, it basically lets you know what the paragraph contains. And for example, for the first paragraph, you can simply write that the most compelling cause of smoking is genetics. You have given one reason, and based on the thesis statement, you have provided one reason. And now you're going to proceed towards providing some supporting details. So from this, the reader will know that you will cover the concept of heredity and smoking within this paragraph. So bullet number 4 has made this clear. You're making your readers aware as well, giving them this concept, giving them an idea what is about to come within this paragraph as well. So this is basically the significance of a topic sentence. You're giving an idea to your readers what information is expected to be there within this paragraph based on the topic sentence which has been written at the very first of this paragraph. Once you have written this topic sentence, it is time to move towards providing supporting details. Sometime 2, sometime 3, even more, depends on the nature of your writing, but the basic purpose is that you have to provide some support, and support comes by developing the paragraph with evidence from credible sources. Again, reverting back to the previous slides, the point written related to support, and support basically comes from examples. So you have to provide supporting details over here at this point by using some credible sources. So they could be of different forms. As written in red, you can say statistics, research information, observations, descriptions, case studies, another good example, interviews, personal experiences, and even the hypothetical situation. Because sometimes you require a hypothetical situation as well, just to make your reader understand what you basically mean by that topic sentence. You have to explain things as well. That's why each one of these strategies are useful to talk and to support your basic topic sentence, ultimately supporting your thesis statement. The more specific the information, the more interesting the paragraph. So the information has to be specific as well. This is the basic purpose of providing the supporting details as well. Now, just coming at the bottom, instead of writing about all the smokers you might just know about, or you might want to write about one particular smoker, someone you know, someone you observed or interviewed or researched. So if it's a case study and you have carried out like a survey, so it will become more authentic. You have studied that case, like that individual person has been studied. So you have looked into the detail of the behavior, then doing this interview and getting all the answers. So it becomes more authentic. So sometime rather than generally discussing a case, if you make it more specific by exemplifying a singular case, it can become the source of making your content more credible and more authentic. So it depends on the strategy, but the basic thing to remember is that over here you have to come up with some supporting details, and support is provided by some credible sources, some credible examples. Then of course the coherence, we have discussed it, and just some points to remember over here, that basically making it a whole. All the things are connected, you have written all the points and they are connected, forming this single body which becomes your draft. So that is how, and you can simply say, I can simply represent it to you in another form, that these are the points that you are writing, and this is the central point for which these are related. In addition to this, there should be a thing which is simply linking these together as well. These are the lines and you link them together as well. This is the basic purpose of coherence. The red lines are indicating that there is a link between these yellow lines, the points that you have written in favor of the top central thesis statement. In addition to this, you are linking these floors or these points together with one another as well, and this becomes the coherence. Whereas this linkage that I have made with this central point at the very beginning, this basically becomes the unity, which will come next basically. But while I have drawn the picture, so I thought I can just show it over here rather than drawing once again another picture, just to give you an idea that that is how you can do it. So all the paragraphs relate to one before it, and all the sentences relate to the one before it as well. So that is how you develop this coherence to form a single body. A strategy to use is the application of transitional words. If I asked you, do you remember the transitional words that we talked about in the previous lectures? These were the ones basically used to connect sentence to a sentence. For example, however, in other words, in contrast, nevertheless. So these are the words, trying to develop this link, making you to move in transition to what you have discussed previously and what's coming ahead. So you simply transit from one place to the other. So from one sentence to the other, these are the words which are used to help you jump from sentence to sentence. So that is how you do it. And another point to remember is this: everything has to be logically following from one to the other instead of being isolated thoughts. This is the point to remember and to be avoided, that if your thoughts are being isolated rather than being linked, it will mean that there is no coherence within your writing, and that is something to be avoided when we talk about developing coherence within your writing. Talking about this unity is once again that link from that top to each and every point, meaning that all the points that you have mentioned are supposed to be directly linked with the top of the house, which is basically the basic thing. Everything has to be linked and supporting the basic thesis statement. All the topic sentences and the supporting details provided within the paragraph have to ultimately link with the thesis statement and have to support it. This is basically the unity, meaning staying on the path relating to the topic sentences of all paragraphs, and every paragraph has to relate with the thesis statement. And in a very unified writing, all the supporting sentences serve to illustrate, clarify, explain the main idea set forth in the topic sentence. And every topic sentence has to illustrate, clarify and explain the main idea provided within the thesis. That is how you develop this unity within the whole writing, unity between paragraphs and unity within a paragraph. At the end of this session, we have an example for you to analyze and to study. There are different errors within this example. It has the addresser, it has the addressee, we have this subject matter as well, but as you can clearly see within this subject, fixed rent rate, and it's written, you're going to ask this question as well, what about it? You haven't written anything. After it, you have the date, and then there are certain errors as well. In an effort to, there is a bad capitalization. To review the rent market during the quarter, I have started by looking at a fixed rate. I ran 3 fixed rent rate investment through the PALMS model. So even I would ask as well, being a new reader, can you tell me what basically this is? And Hamid downloaded the market shares into a spreadsheet. That's why this is the question. The results are in 2 attachments, references here to this memo. Attachment 1 has all 3 of the rent rate investments funded by what Hamid selected, and attachment 2 shows what I picked in mortgage investments, only 2 bonds, detail and detail what I picked to fund them. So over here the question of you and my would be that why repeating the reference of these 2 attachments here, because a detail is also coming. If you just look to the next one, attachment 1 show, and then the detail, and then if you look at the paragraph which is coming over here, so the detail of attachment 1 and 2 are here. Why this redundancy that we have talked about that we have to avoid? So why this reference of attachments again and again? One thing clear, attachment 1 show that the spread is barely over 5. We'll move ahead afterwards, but the problem over here is of the subject verb agreement. Don't you think there is one thing in singular, which form of verb has to be used? Of course we say shows, but over here there is a mistake. You move ahead and talk about this barely over 5 BPS, so even I couldn't understand, I couldn't read it for the first time what do we mean by it. So we have to define this thing as well. Now I pronounced it in this way, but again it's written in an incorrect form, that it also shows the longer duration and more convexity, so a vague pronoun reference. Again a mistake of this then instead of this then, there is a wrong use of this word then and then, and over here again a new error has been highlighted, boldface headings for greater access. So these are some of the errors. Again a reference of using 29 words in a straightforward manner rather than any break, rather than any punctuation, again an incorrect form. To add spread as attachment 1 and 2 show, again this error of subject verb agreement. Then certain references coming at the bottom, my intent was to show you. So use of passive voice, do you think you would have written it in this way if we have used this active voice rather than passive voice? My intent was, why making this intent important rather than you yourself? Because it's your intention. Where are you? Your intent is being more highlighted rather than yourself. I can conclude that the fixed rent rate market is still very tight, making it difficult for the bank. Again being more wordy, trying to be lengthy within your writing, which is something to be avoided, and that's why it is recommended to be short, brief, especially within a memo, which is something written in short, directly addressing the issue. So after highlighting all the errors, my first recommendation would be that try to practice all the errors on your own that you can remove, and once you have written your draft, then you can compare it to the one that I'll show you once I move ahead to the next slide. But for now, you can just give it a pause. Just try to remove all the errors that you can do on your own. Once you have the corrected form of this memo, tally it with the one that I'm going to show it in a couple of minutes. You can just do your practice. Once you're done for a while, you can just pause, then play, and we'll have this practice in comparison with the next one. So it's time to move to the corrected memo. Now you can clearly see the subject being clearly written. The rest of the details are fine. To review the rent market, I've started by looking at a fixed rate. Over here, if you remember, I said, what do we mean by PALM? So it's basically a financial circulator model. We have the details of the model as well. Now, thankfully, you can see there are no continuous references to our attachments. We have separate details of what basically attachment 1 has and what attachment 2 basically has. And then you have this references of 5 BPS if you remember. So basis points which equal 100 of a percentage point in the base case. Again, this details being provided to all the abbreviations which you are using. And once this thing has been cleared, coming to the bottom, in this memo, I have shown what was available in the fixed rent rate market. So you are the person who is actually doing it rather than your intent being more important. So you conclude that the fixed rent rate market is very tight, making it difficult for the bank to invest in and make a spread. Things are more clear, don't you think? And hopefully, my hope is that the corrections which you would have done are quite similar to the one which you have just found. Even if there are few points which are missing, is something natural, nothing to worry about it. We already had this corrected version, so that's why it was more easier for us to make you understand, but you were the actual person doing the exercise, so big thumbs up for you. So summing it all up, within the final slide, I just have to say that it won't happen overnight. It would require planning, drafting, rereading, revising and editing as well, that we are going to see how you can do it as well. It requires an exercise as well. Then the improvement would come from self-review, peer review, subject matter experts' feedback, and of course the practice. And then your practice is going to make you perfect gradually and steadily. And if you go for the shortcuts, you won't reach that perfection.
Let's summarize the lecture with a storyline. I hope you like stories. Let's say you are a student who loves to write drafts but don't know how to. You really want to write drafts but you don't know how to provide a valid sequence and organization of information. And you really want to perfect your understanding of order, giving relevant examples and want to use technical descriptions. This is where this lecture comes in. At this stage, you are going to make your first draft. What really is a draft, by the way? There are a few stages you need to keep in mind. Initially, you need to consider the sequence in which you want to present your ideas. By this, we mean that your ideas must be organized considering unity, support, and coherence. There are 5 forms in which you could organize your draft. First and simple most way is the chronological method of organization, which is typically used for instructions. Next, we have the special method, which is usually adopted for technical descriptions. To share important information, you write reports and memos. This organizes information according to importance. The above organization types are also different forms of a draft. In another form of a draft, you can analyze a problem, make a proposal, and give its suggested solution. For showing alternatives, you opt for what's called the comparison or contrast as a method for organizing your content. There are 5 separate writing characteristics that will help your reader to understand your draft. Number 1. In a thesis statement, you introduce your topic and write a 1-sentence statement. Number 2. For clarity, each paragraph should begin with the topic sentence that states the main idea of that paragraph. Number 3. You should support your topic ideas by developing the paragraphs with evidence from credible sources. Number 4. All the paragraphs should relate to the one before it to make it a coherent piece of writing. Number 5. Make sure all sentences relate to the core topic and of course the starting sentence. This would ensure that all paragraphs relate to the thesis to bring unity in your writing.
So with this, I come to the end. This is what we have successfully covered. Stage 2, writing techniques with examples of the writing process. Now we're going to move ahead within our next lecture to the stage 3 of the writing process. But for now, that's goodbye and Assalamu alaikum from my side. Thank you.